This sound took the 90s by storm with the help of a couple key acts. This sound defined the counterculture, standing for beliefs and visually looking entirely different from what was being pushed at the time. So what is this sound that I'm talking about? Join me and we'll go through it together, because this is a beginner's guide to grunge. So what is grunge? Honestly, it can be pretty difficult to describe, but the common denominator in people's attempts at describing it is Seattle. Seattle was undoubtedly the birthplace of grunge as a genre, transpiring in the late 1980s. The term had been used to describe different music throughout the years, but in the sense of the grunge genre we know now, it was first used publicly by Bruce Pavitt, co-founder of the Washington-based independent label Sub Pop, in a company catalog to describe the 1987 EP Dry as Bone by the forever underrated Green River. The band goes a little further back than that, having released the EP Come On Down in 1985, which may now retroactively be considered the first grunge release. And this new title was born because these Green River releases weren't quite punk, they weren't quite metal, rather they were somewhere in between, but with an abundantly gritty sound between all the fuzz, distortion, and just noise, whereas generally bands aimed for a pure, clean, high-definition sound. This is why rock legend Neil Young has been dubbed the godfather of grunge, because while he himself doesn't quite fit the genre and certainly predates it, he had been using overdriven electric guitar for maybe 20 years by this point, even on hit songs like Hey Hey My My, for example. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention Wipers as an influence to the genre. They were more in line with punk rock, but hailing from Portland, they were real close by to the scene and were no strangers to distortion themselves. Even an album in particular many in the scene pointed to as an inspiration was Black Flag's My War, a hardcore punk band themselves, with the second side of the record being entirely made of long, slow, Black Sabbath-inspired songs. For the perfect mixture of punk and metal for a genre that was, again, much the same. Additionally, lots of bands here were throwing the rules out the window, inspired by the free nature of groups like Husker Du or Sonic Youth doing absolutely whatever. On top of that, in a lot of cases the music wasn't to lift you up. Coming from the drug-ridden Seattle scene, where opium trade has been big since the mid-1800s, the music would bring you down with it. So in between those two Green River EPs I mentioned were some other significant releases, one being Deep Six. This was a compilation put out by the now defunct CZ Records, showcasing what kind of music local Washington bands were creating. Appearing on it alongside Green River were Soundgarden, who were even rougher, Malfunction, who also included elements of glam, Melvins, who had a reputation for slow, heavy songs, again under the influence of Black Sabbath, and fellow underrated groups Skin Yard and the U-Men, many of these acts appearing on record for the first time, and all playing a role in shaping the genre to come. 3 months after this, Sub Pop dropped their first release, the compilation Sub Pop 100. This featured the previously mentioned Wipers, Sonic Youth, and U-Men, as well as Steve Albini, who was big in the noise rock scene, where the DIY ethos would largely overlap with that of grunge. as well as the Vancouver-based Skinny Puppy, who were more so industrial but shared that same abrasiveness. So getting back to Dry as Bone, in 1987 Green River was immediately ready to head back to the studio to work on a full-length album, though issues would arise during these sessions. With the growing popularity of this new Seattle sound, guitarist Stone Gossard and bassist Jeff Ament were interested in securing a major label deal. However, frontman Mark Arm preferred the band stay independent, knowing there would be both limitations and demands working for an industry, foreshadowing a divide that would continue to haunt the genre. The members couldn't resolve their differences, and Green River, the first face of grunge music, would dissolve, though they did at least commit to finishing the album, 1988's Rehab Doll. Despite the members' differences, their passion for making music never disappeared, so even though Green River split, we're thankful for what came next. Gossard and Ament would merge with Malfunction to start a new band, Mother Love Bone. They retained some of Malfunction's glam aspects at the hand of charismatic frontman Andrew Wood, and Gossard and Ament remained at the forefront of grunge as Mother Love Bone became one of Seattle's biggest bands in no time, and they got their wish, signing to Polygram, a subsidiary of Polydor. As a result, they wouldn't end up on the next Sub Pop compilation, Sub Pop 200, but some notable others would. Mark Arm's new band Mudhoney, who in typical Arm fashion didn't see much commercial success, but are fondly remembered. As well as Soundgarden, Screaming Trees, Tad, and a couple youngsters who went by the name Nirvana. It wouldn't take long for other bands to reap similar rewards to Mother Love Bone. Soundgarden had been earning major interest at the time, but went the Mark Arm route and stayed with a smaller label, SST, formed by Black Flag guitarist Greg Ginn, to handle their debut album, Ultra Mega OK. Frontman Chris Cornell would later admit what a mistake this was, because SST and the producer they got Soundgarden were California-based and didn't have enough knowledge of this bubbling Seattle scene they were a part of. With that being said, in 1989 they signed with A&M Records, who would be acquired by Polygram within the year, and Soundgarden would therefore share a label with Mother Love Bone. But this move earned the band backlash from fans who felt they had sold out. And another new band would sign a major label this year thanks to their stage presence, when Alice in Chains was picked up by Columbia. Grunge was on the rise, and it was only a matter of time now. In early 1990, Soundgarden's major label debut, Louder Than Love, would reach 108 on the Billboard Top 200 albums, while their previous album, Ultra Mega OK, would be nominated for Best Metal Performance at the Grammys, though losing to Metallica's song One. In March, Mother Love Bone's debut Apple was set to hit the shelves, but tragedy would strike as frontman Andrew Wood would pass from a heroin overdose only days before. It was a terrible event that hurt the close-knit scene, as Chris Cornell, a former roommate of Wood's, would write songs in memory while on the road with Soundgarden. He would bring these to Mother Love Bone's Gossard and Ament with the idea of a tribute in mind. This evolved from just being a single to a full-fledged album, and Cornell would bring along Soundgarden drummer Matt Cameron, while Gossard would bring along a childhood friend, guitarist Mike McCready. But there would also be a sixth face to this act. Gossard and Ament were already intent on starting a new band, knowing Mother Love Bone would be no more, which is where McCready came in, as well as a new singer they had held an audition for, Eddie Vedder. This new band would of course be Pearl Jam, whose debut album 10 would be released in August 1991, 4 months after this tribute to Andrew Wood with Chris Cornell, Temple of the Dog. Believe it or not, these two seminal albums would be overshadowed by another, Alice in Chains' debut Facelift, featuring the band's haunting sound and the magnificent tandem of voices from frontman Lane Staley and guitarist Jerry Cantrell. The album had actually been released the year prior in 1990, but didn't have much of an initial splash. That all changed, however, when MTV picked up the music video for the single Man in the Box. Facelift went from selling 40,000 copies in 6 months to 400,000 copies in 6 weeks, becoming the first grunge release to earn a gold certification. As great as an accomplishment that was, they would quickly be overshadowed themselves. Nirvana's debut album Bleach was released back in 1989 on Sub Pop, but like Soundgarden before them, they were unsatisfied with how things went, this time coming down to a lack of promotion. This led them to contact Susan Silver, a woman who was about to be dubbed the most powerful figure in local rock management, considering she managed U-Men, Soundgarden, Screaming Trees, Alice in Chains, and now had the opportunity to manage Nirvana, but turned them down due to her schedule being busy enough as it was. In hindsight, this was a regret, but she did get them set up with the right people, because with grunge's quick rise, everybody was buying in, and Geffen would be the big winner. They released Nirvana's second album, Nevermind, just 10 days after Facelift was certified gold, taking significantly less time to go gold itself in only 2 months, and dethroned Michael Jackson of all people for number 1 on the Billboard by January of 1992. Grunge was now seismic and indicative of a cultural shift. Fans were no longer looking up to and admiring big-budget, celebrity-status rock stars. They saw someone who looked just like anybody else and faced the same issues they faced: depression, disparity, injustice, tragedy. It was real music for real people who weren't putting on a fake look and smile to appease the outside world, getting out their frustrations over their issues, and this was even the setting for the film Singles. And coming from the blue state of Washington, you could also call this a liberal genre, with such memorable moments as Eddie Vedder making his stance known during Pearl Jam's MTV Unplugged performance, Kurt Cobain claiming he wishes he were gay because he knows that would piss off a lot of people, and the constant cross-dressing that went on. This combination gave the opportunity for many women to be prominent in the scene, with groups like Hole, L7, and Babes in Toyland getting recognition, among others gravitating to the newly developing Riot Girl scene. A large fraction of grunge songs also tended to deal with addiction, as had been captured on Alice in Chains' 1992 album Dirt. And through grunge's peak, these acts who were all hot off recent album releases would emerge as the so-called Big Four of grunge: Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, and Nirvana, all helping successfully fuel the genre further and further. But with this overwhelming success, everybody wanted a piece. Labels were all trying to sign the next big grunge act, which led to less impressive acts or copycats getting all sorts of promotion, but it also brings us back to trying to establish what grunge even is. It's angsty and it's alternative, but it's Seattle, right? But in becoming so global, you had bands trying to emulate that sound, or who were influenced by that sound, or who were being advertised as having that sound. Aren't Stone Temple Pilots grunge? The argument is so divisive that in a 1994 Rolling Stone poll, fans dubbed them the best new band, while simultaneously critics dubbed them the worst new band as posers of the genre. So while not within the genre themselves, didn't Smashing Pumpkins have grunge elements? Even international acts, did Bush, nor Silverchair, nor Radiohead have grunge influence? Many of the biggest names in the scene even grew to hate the term grunge, distancing themselves from it, But even nitpicking the specifics of the music aside, if anything, it was commercialism that marked the downfall of the genre. That same debate that broke up Green River only years ago re-emerged as it went from an independent local scene to a worldwide phenomenon, with many struggling with what came of that. The community did get a laugh, however, when a Sub Pop employee pranked the New York Times into publishing a list of grunge slang that, unbeknownst to them, was bogus. That employee is now the CEO of the label. But Nirvana frontman Kurt Cobain was a notable critic, and even tried to dispel some of that clambering attention by reverting to a more abrasive sound for Nirvana's third album, In Utero, with the help of producer Steve Albini. Pearl Jam felt a similar way, as they started to refuse making music videos for their songs or partaking in interviews around the time of their second album, Versus, which set a record for most copies sold in its first week, and the band understandably wanted to give themselves some space. Simply put, grunge became big enough that it could be corrupted, where you now had brands selling $100 outfits to look like a guy who spent $10 on his.
Long johns and shorts for like $300. And it's like we got them fooled. We wear long johns up here because it's fucking cold.
It was also at this time that Marc Jacobs was called the guru of grunge. With grunge's sudden oversaturation and quickly fading authenticity, the Titans started to see themselves out.
It's so profitable. It's so profitable, and they'll just keep taking and taking and taking, and they just don't know how to restrain themselves.
Bands like Candlebox could come onto the scene and release a not very well received album and still go 4 times platinum. So our big name bands kept trying to evolve their sounds. In November of 1993, Nirvana gave an MTV Unplugged performance for the ages, and in their typical independent style went against the rules by A, using electric guitar, B, playing covers,
Your face to face of a man who saw the world.
and C, inviting another band on stage. After this, Alice in Chains released one of the greatest EPs of all time, and it was all acoustic. While Soundgarden's previous album Bad Motorfinger was relatively overshadowed by the combined successes of Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, and Nirvana at the same time, their 1994 album Super Unknown would debut at number 1 on the Billboard, thanks to hits like Spoon Man and Black Hole Sun.
Black hole sun, won't you come? Wash away the rain.
It wouldn't be long after that the genre, and even the music world, was turned on its head.
Kurt Cobain's music moved a generation of young people.
His voice and his words spoke to their fears and frustrations.
Kurt Cobain would take his life after years of depression and drug abuse. The music world mourned the loss, as did his wife Courtney Love, whose band Hole was scheduled to release an album that same week.
Yeah, they really want you, I do too.
Hole bassist Kristen Paff would also unfortunately pass of an overdose only 2 months after this. Despite all this heartbreak, greed would continue to rear its ugly head. Pearl Jam got into it with Ticketmaster after they played some benefit shows and found out the company was charging fans unjustifiably high service fees on tickets. They couldn't even play big venues that didn't use Ticketmaster because practically all of them did, something Pearl Jam contacted the Department of Justice on, claiming Ticketmaster had a monopoly on the industry. This made for a challenging 1995 tour, but on the bright side, their latest album, Vitology, would be the second fastest selling album in history. Around this time, Mike McCready would check himself into rehab. He would befriend another musician there, and once they were out, would start a new band, recruiting Screaming Trees drummer Barrett Martin and another man they hoped to free from his substance abuse, Lane Staley. This grunge supergroup was Mad Season and released their lone album Above in 1995. And this was hardly the only collaborating McCready was doing at this time, as Pearl Jam would be recruited as the backing band for the godfather of grunge on his latest album, Mirrorball. Grunge had slowly been on its way out the door, but now we were really nearing the end. Alice in Chains would play a remarkable MTV Unplugged set, and Soundgarden and Screaming Trees would each release what ended up being their last albums. Grunge interest in the UK had already been lost a few years prior with the rise of their own movement, Britpop, fronted by bands like Oasis and Blur. Amidst the clash between the two styles, the Gallagher brothers of Oasis were never ones to keep their opinions to themselves, and Blur even wrote a grunge parody song. Maybe they should have made that more obvious, because Song 2 became their biggest hit in America. So can we say that by 1997 the era had ended? Nirvana was no more, Soundgarden split over creative differences, and Alice in Chains never necessarily broke up, but Staley was suffering so heavily from his drug addiction, and it eventually claimed his life. Courtney Love wasn't in much shape to perform, and Hole would soon fall apart. Mudhoney was still doing their thing all this time later, but without much mainstream success. But Mark Arm's former bandmates in Pearl Jam were still going strong. Them, alongside Stone Temple Pilots, as well as former Nirvana drummer Dave Grohl with his new band Foo Fighters, were present, but they all had moved past that harsh sound they started with. And in some cases, these new bands trying to enter the scene still would be labeled post-grunge. The music could still have a bit of an edge to it, but much less so, and it was certainly less depressing. This made it more commercially viable, which only further enticed labels who were buying into grunge and looking for the next big thing, and that's why you have bands that could be considered posers if they were trying to advertise themselves as being legitimate grunge groups.
Generic 90s grunge song, something from Seattle.
It was the less cool, less authentic second wave of grunge.
I do, thank you for this too. I do, but you have a clue.
Though not being advertised any differently, and with corporate backing on top of that to be even less cool. A writer for Spin magazine even came up with the brilliant phrase corporate alternative to describe this. Bands that generally fall into this category include Collective Soul, Live, and Weezer, as well as the previously mentioned Candlebox and Bush. Plus, with it being promoted so much and played so much, post-grunge only became more popular with time once you got bands like Creed and Nickelback. But grunge was never built to last. I mean, how could it? The genre's entire time frame spanned a mere 10 years, which comes as no surprise when depression and drug use were so prevalent to the music. So that has been a beginner's guide to the short-lived scene that was grunge. Let me know what you think of the video and who your favorite band from this period was. As always, stay safe, and until next time.
Bye-bye, good night.